everyone was here. That was your last time. So same title slide. We're going over the neuromuscular kind of physiology, key adaptations. So I kind of, like I said before we started, I added a couple more slides. We organized a few things. So we're going to kind of, as the name suggests, basically how I separate it is we're going to talk about like nerve-based stuff and then like muscle-based stuff. So those are kind of neuromuscular, two main adaptations. Shoes untied. Oh, well. So it's going to be a little text heavy, but we'll go through it one by one. Okay. So this is kind of overview of the main neural adaptations. So these are like the things that change within like your nervous system, whether it be at the brain level, the nerve level, and just kind of how your brain and nerves communicate with your muscle. So starting off, I just want to like point to this picture real quick. You can ignore that up here. Basically, what goes on whenever somebody starts training, whether beginner, whether somebody hasn't trained in a while, for the first few weeks, that's kind of what this line's showing here. Most of the progress they're seeing is going to be nerve-based stuff. So that's why you might have heard like, oh, it takes 6 to 8 weeks before you start to seeing like muscle gains, or why somebody's like, I'm feeling stronger, but I'm not seeing a lot of changes in my body yet. What they'll actually be feeling, and this is like I'll tell my clients, is like you're going to notice like you're going to have better energy. You're going to recover faster between sets. You're going to be able to lift heavier weights without even necessarily seeing a lot of muscle yet. So all that has to do with how the nerves are changing. And then from there, after that, that's then when hypertrophy or the muscle level changes start to happen. And then that's kind of goes back real quick to what I was talking with Ryan Des about in the beginning, is that's why like retention with your clients and really trying to get them to that 8-week mark is important, because that's when they're really going to start seeing those changes. And if you can get them across that 8-week mark, that's when they're really going to kind of buy in, because now they're like, oh, now I'm seeing the changes on top of feeling the changes. And that's why I like to do like a 12-week commitment, so I can get them to that point, at least get them through about 4 weeks of that. So I try to get them to right about here. And then just to finish the conversation on this graph, there is what's called a biological ceiling, where you'll reach a point where this is your overall performance improvement or strength improvement. In the beginning, it's nerve, later it's muscle, and then they're just kind of, you're going to hit your ceiling eventually. Now, for most people, they're never going to hit this ceiling. Like you could think this ceiling is like professional athletes, Olympic athletes. So for the most part, people can continue getting benefits forever. And then this little dash line here, this is where steroids come in. So before we go into that, that's kind of actually a question I wanted to start with. It was one of my professors phrased to me in college, is like, what is your stance on steroids when it comes to just like exercise and performance? Like, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Like, okay. Why would it be a good thing? Like, what would be your argument for a good thing?
You're not always going to have that performance if you don't have that.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And just to kind of pre-frame a little bit more, is like I'm also like talking about like extra pharmacological doses, or meaning like you have like normal hormone levels. You don't need like replacement therapy. This is for people who they'll get what they need with what they have. They don't need more testosterone, or they're not in menopause or stuff like that. This is more of like, maybe even in the context of sport, like athletes who get banned from their sport or suspensions for taking those steroids. Anybody else? Any thoughts on it? Ryan?
For me, steroids is psychologically, physically, you'll get what you want.
Mm-hmm.
Psychologically is where we do a lot of our fighting, especially in this gym. We're trying to change the psychological aspect of how people
Mm-hmm.
health and see health, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one of the big things that we focus on, and I know that that's not focus on, is stress and sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Steroids, it's a big thing where it affects your sleep, which then affects your stress.
Mm-hmm.
Psychologically, which are really suicidal tendencies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some pretty fatal things with some clients.
Mhm.
in the past where they completely come off steroids because it's all the benefits of, but also what it was taking as a slippery slope.
Costing their health a little bit.
Yeah, and what happened is they ended up taking their own life.
Mhm.
Because, they just completely came off of it, and yeah, psychologically, the benefits are a lot different.
Definitely. So, like on that, like that's where for some people psychologically, the way with some examples is they've seen it, and again, this is for somebody who's near this ceiling. So take somebody like Ronnie Coleman, for example, or any bodybuilder. Like they get so high in their strength and muscle mass and with their goals, some people say, I'm willing to take on that risk to just be able to do what I want to do. And like people even ask Ronnie Coleman now because he can barely move. They'll ask him like, "Would you do what you did all over again?" He's like, 100%, because that's what I was there for. So for some people, they can tolerate that. Then on like more of a negative side, and this is something I see at least when I was in high school, like high school athletes, and this is maybe where it's portrayed in a bad way because kids will see these videos of these big bodybuilders. So like a big thing when I was in high school, a lot of kids were on Trent. And so they're gaining all this muscle mass, but while they're developing. So there's a lot of injury that can come with that in terms of how they develop. And then one other interesting one, this was the bulk of our conversation during that lecture, because there's a video on it in a documentary, but was, what's his name? Lance Armstrong. So he got banned, or he lost his world record because they found he was blood doping. But this is where that psychology conversation for him is a little bit different. He said, we were training so much, pushing our bodies so hard, our bodies were breaking down, but our brain wanted to keep going. And we just couldn't deal with that desire. Like their brain just wanted them to keep pushing, but their body couldn't. So like that's why we wanted to do it, so we could make our brain happier in terms of maximizing the potential of what our brain wanted us to do. So that's where, like, for me, it's like it depends, and which is exciting to kind of see, interesting to see. As you guys didn't know, there's the enhanced games coming out, which is basically the Olympics, but steroids are allowed.
Yeah,
So
do you know when that's happening?
I think it's 2026 to 2028, starting soon. I don't think it's 2026 because that's when the actual Olympics are, right?
Is it? I don't know. Is it? Yeah.
Oh, 28. Yeah, 28.
Is it like the same Olympic Games?
I don't know if all the games are going to be the same, but it's big. The way I've seen it marketed is it's basically the Olympics. They're going to have Olympic style events, but there's no regulation on steroids.
That's wild.
So there's probably going to be powerlifting. So yeah.
Do you know who's putting that on?
I forget his name. Some
rich
guy.
dude.
Yeah, some rich dude. Yep. All right. So that was just kind of the lead in to kind of go in. What's that? And that's just kind of when you get to that. So for most people, and that's probably the setting Ryan's talking about, they don't even get to this, and then they kind of want to cheat their way. Not to say cheat their way, but they want to get there faster. And then that's usually where you start to see those problems. And realistically, it just means you have to work harder, because once you get to this level, that's where now you have to train at a higher intensity, train more frequently a week, do things like that, because your body's just so well adapted. It needs more stress. And then with that stress comes greater recovery. So in most people's daily lives, they just don't have the time to do all those things. So that's where they'll turn to those steroids. Okay, so now diving into these. So basically there's 5 main things that at least I wrote out that go on with what changes with your nerves. So the first, and we kind of touched on motor units last week. We'll go over them again, just review. But basically those motor units, as you train, your body starts to recruit more of them at once. So that's why, like in the beginning, you might feel like shaky, weak. And without seeing more muscle, all of a sudden you're a lot more stable. Your body's controlling more muscles, so things are more stable. You're generating more force through more muscle activation. Then there's another thing called improved motor unit synchronization. So you could basically just think of it as all the electrical currents are firing more evenly across each other. So now all your muscles are more coordinated. You have greater coordination. You can move better. So everything's more in sync. And then there's this also concept called reduced antagonist muscle coactivation. Fancy phrase for saying, like, if you want to do a bicep curl, this is the agonist, the main mover. This is the antagonist, this opposes movement. So this muscle's job is to help stabilize. In a weaker person, that muscle is going to be a little bit tighter and more restricted to prevent injury to this muscle. So as you train, the muscles on the opposite side of the muscle you're using actually becomes more flexible in essence to the movement. So now you get greater movement and full range of motion. So that's another early stage thing. Then there's, and an organ is basically a receptor kind of around your tendons. It's called the Golgi tendon organ. And its job is to sense stretch. So whenever it senses stretch, it tells your muscle to stop moving. So it's meant to prevent injury. But as you start training, that tendon and that organ become more malleable to stretch. And that's where you'll start to see more range of motion as well. And with more stretch, more force. So that's another one, the Golgi tendon organ. And then final one, rate of force development. This is just the speed at which the signal is sent down the nerves. It's sent faster. So you can send that signal faster, which means the muscles are activated more frequently. So you're going to get more force production. And then at the bottom, like I said, the early strength gains that you're seeing 4 to 8 weeks on average are mostly nerves. So that's why and this is mostly for beginners too. That's why they'll be able to see strength gains without even any muscle growth. Any questions on those so far? Okay. So then the next level is, now that we talked about the nerves, the next level is going to be kind of the muscles. You can kind of ignore this picture for the most part. It was just to kind of show you that as muscle grows, it starts. So that's kind of what that means in terms of more cross-sectional area. You have more myosin, more actin, more cross bridges, more of those little biceps, mini biceps that contract your muscles. And this is, depending on how you train, if it's strength training, it's mostly going to be those type 2 fibers. So Annabelle, this is kind of what we talked about at the end, where you can come in mostly type 1. Most people are, but as you start training, you're going to start developing more type 2s. So that's kind of what this picture is showing, is as you develop based on the stress you're putting on your body, the way you're training, that's going to determine, for the most part, how your muscle fibers adapt. And that's kind of the last one, is you can shift them. So if you're more type 1 slow twitch, if you do a lot of fast explosive stuff, heavier lifting, you can go this way. And then if you're very fast and explosive, but you have terrible endurance, you can also help improve these by doing more endurance type training. So that's kind of the main shifts across the muscle, is growth of the fibers, change in just kind of how they align, and then the shifting between fiber types. So now just kind of going back to those first slides, just to kind of put that all together. The nerve system, the neuromuscular system as a whole, like we talked about, you have the brain, sends a signal down your spinal cord, that's picked up by the nerves coming out of your spine, that sends it to the motor neurons that are attached to your muscle, and then that activates your muscle. So like we talked about, one of the adaptations is that signal is going to be sent faster. So that's the firing rate. It's going to send faster. Synchronization, if you imagine all these were going out in multiple muscles, more of these are going to fire at once, on top of being able to activate more of them at once. So that's kind of the neuromuscular adaptation overview. So this is a motor neuron. I've added this one just to give you a better example of just the structure of it, what it looks like. This is kind of thing that's close to your spinal cord, and then it sends it down. That's where the signal that travels, and then these are those neuromuscular junctions where all of that communication happens. So I just added that so you can see what it looks like in a little bit more clear way. So this zooms in on that. Like I said, this picture was kind of granulated, so that's why I added that other one so you can see a little bit better. But it's basically the same thing. So the motor neuron, or motor unit. So the motor neuron is just that. That's a motor neuron. A motor unit then is this motor neuron and all of the individual fibers it innervates. So again, you're going to grow more of these. You're going to innervate more fibers. You're going to have more attachment points. The signal is going to run faster. That's the main nerve adaptation. And again, that's what's going on in the first 4 to 8 weeks, is you're just enhancing that whole process, that whole signal, without even changing the muscle yet. So zooming in on that neuromuscular junction, like we did last time. So this is where that signal that's been sent down from the brain into that motor neuron, and then this is where it meets with the muscle. Basically, there's some minerals that are released here, sodium, potassium, all those things. Then that picks the channel, and then it goes down here, and then these are those myosin and actin. So looking at this at the muscle level, you're going to grow more of these. That signal is going to come faster and activate more of those. So that's kind of how your body gets stronger, is you create more cross bridges, You send that signal faster, and you have more of these insertion points across your muscle. So everything just communicates faster, moves faster, gets bigger. Any questions on like the nerve so far?
Wow, amazing.
How do peptides get involved here?
So peptides, this is one I'd have to like go back in terms of the actual mechanisms, reading that. But there are certain peptides. Trying to think of one. One of my colleagues was studying one. Can't remember the exact name of the peptide. But basically, where those peptides come in, the one he was looking at, if I remember correctly, is it enhances the ability for acetylcholine to be present. So it was an acetylcholine. It helped your body produce more acetylcholine, and that is the molecule that helps tell your muscles to release calcium. So there with more acetylcholine, that peptide caused a reaction that led to more acetylcholine, and that acetylcholine led to more calcium. And the more calcium that's present, the more cross bridges that can be activated. That he was talking about. No, it wasn't BPC. So BPC 157, that peptide, from my understanding, is a little bit better for more like recovery and regeneration. So it's not it's not approved for sport yet, but like they've done studies on it where people like tear their ACL. They'll give them the BPC 157. In a matter of weeks, it's regrown and reattached.
Wait a second.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wait a second.
Oh yeah, ACL. Yeah.
Why was I not told this?
Yeah. Well, it's one you gotta. It's like new and emerging. So it's like one not even a lot of doctors or nurses maybe know about, or if they know about it, they don't use it in practice yet.
Okay, so what if Marco said, "I told you, Des."
Yeah. So because what it does is
He did,
part of
in all fairness, he did tell me. I decided not to listen to him because it's me.
Because so like with like it's similar to when you tear something, you break a bone, and this is one thing I've always is a little separate from this, but is your body basically there's little chemicals that go out and they communicate, and it creates like a little chemical bridge, and then that tells your body where to grow the new bone or where to regrow the ligament. So to my understanding, the BPC 157 helps accelerate that process and enhance that process, so you're able to recover faster. But again, I think it also depends on the complexity of the injury, how severely it was torn, and those are all things where probably why a lot of doctors don't use it is they don't know exactly based on the grade of your tear, the grade of your break, or whatever, when it's indicated.
Yeah, because it's new.
I think the biggest thing with peptides is that there's just not enough research with it.
Exactly.
And long-term research.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be potentially a great thing to be
Mm-hmm.
used. But again, it's just we don't have those studies that are done. And then we have a lot of quote unquote doctors that are now certified to sell it, and it just becomes now a marketing and selling.
Exactly.
So
and a lot of it's like anecdotal too. Like I was saying, like one of my buddies, he's a nurse, and so he knew about it. He had an injury and he used it and he recovered super quickly. I think it was like a shoulder injury. Mm-hmm. But to your point is, it's not well researched. So it's like, it could be a good thing to help you recover from your injury in the next few weeks, but are there any ramifications of it 10 years from now?
Marco said, add TB 500 to BPC 157 and it's supposed to be even better. This all just sounds like numbers to me.
Yeah.
Sounds like a math equation.
Yeah, I'm unaware of that one, Marco. So
500 plus 157.
Yeah.
500 plus 157 equals healed ACL.
Yeah.
No, I just.
Yeah, so I don't know that one, unfortunately.
I'm hilarious.
Marco, I'm sorry. So this is just kind of like motor unit recruitment. Now, just kind of describe what that is. It's also like, have you ever heard the term like neural drive? Like, oh, you have more neural drive. That's just this whole process of your nerves communicating better. So basically, when a motor neuron fires, it's sending what's called an action potential. That's the current. That's the electrical signal. So like I was saying, the frequency of these impulses is faster. So if you imagine this continued, like you're probably like that at the start. But then as you start training the frequency, they start firing faster. So you get more activation sooner, faster. So you're going to be a little bit more explosive. You'll be able to jump higher. Higher firing rates, like I said, leads to more frequent contractions, greater overall force. But it's not just the firing rate, but it's also, like I said, more motor units. So with more current means more activation, so you can activate more things. You can think of just like electricity. If you had a stronger electrical current, you can charge more things, turn on more things. And then one thing to note is like muscle fatigue, age, and just the specific muscle you're kind of looking at all kind of influence, one, these adaptations, but two, how far you can adapt them. So like obviously the older you get, the more limited you're going to be with these certain types of things. So I think that's the kind of final slide on motor units for now. Oh no, we got the Henneman size principle to retouch on again. So we'll go into the, like I said, the muscle fibers and all that will be next. But this just goes back to that signal and why a stronger current's better, because these muscles are gated by thresholds. Fancy phrase for saying is these require greater voltage. So you could think of like, you have, I don't know, like an iPhone charger versus something that needs like, like an industrial machine. Industrial machines need more electricity. They need more power to operate. Same idea with your muscles. So these muscles require more electrical current. So that's why you can see without even changing these muscles, greater strength gains, because you're activating more of these muscles. And then as well, that goes back to why we want to do our warm-ups, because that's going to get that current going. So now you're going to have these muscles on. Why you have that CNS primer in your warm-up, that's turning these on. So when you go into your first main lift, you're training these muscles and not these muscles. And then that extends to kind of the example I gave where I said, so I've heard with a lot of my clients or just people in general, like, yeah, it wasn't until like the 4th or 5th set that I really started to feel like good with my workout. And then first question I was like, did you warm up? No, I just went in and hopped straight on the squat rack. So that's where this kind of comes into play. And then like we talked about in terms of fiber type shifting, you can start growing more of these, but the principle remains the same. You still got to do your warm up. You're just going to have more of these in general. So you're going to be stronger for it. Yep. So that's that one. Type 1 to type 2, low to high. You got to activate the small ones to get the big ones. So this is that skeletal muscle structure. So like I was saying, these, you don't grow more of this. You grow more of these guys. So as these grow, they take up more space. So that's how muscles get bigger. Once you're like fully developed, you're done with puberty, these are kind of predetermined. There is some animals, and they're still researching it, but there are some animals that can do what's called, and growing new muscles called hyperplasia. So that means the growth of new muscle fibers. So there are some like species of bird that can grow more muscle fibers. And then research, they're trying to figure out how to implement that in humans, especially with people like with different muscle atrophy issues and stuff like that, being able to help people grow new muscle. Similar to nerves, actually, while we're on the topic. They're doing a lot of nerve studies around the olfactory nerve, which is like the nerves in your nose, because they're the most regenerative. If you think about it, like if you smell something spicy or something burns your nose, that burning sensation is your nerve endings actually burning. But you never lose the sense of smell. It comes back. So they're actually studying that process, and they've done one study where they took olfactory nerves, put it in someone's spine who's paralyzed, and they started walking again. So that's a cool thing on the nerves. So yeah, that's that one. What?
So that is cool.
Yeah, that, and then like stem cells and all that too. So that's that one, and then we'll get in the cross bridge real quick. So like I said, that calcium comes in, turns on this process, and that causes these to contract. So with more of these bridges, you're creating more force, greater strength. Do you guys want me to go over all this again? Are you guys good on that? Okay.
Whatever you think.
Huh?
Whatever you think.
Okay. The main thing I wanted to touch on, like I said, the calcium comes in, but just to kind of bridge it one more time with our last one on energy, is that's where a lot of this ATP comes in. So that's why as you start to deplete your energy, why your muscle stops operating optimally, is because you don't have the ATP to cause this process to happen. So that's where you might being able to, like if you're taking a set close to failure, you're not able to finish that rep. You're running out of ATP to process this cross bridge cycle. Or, and we'll touch on this at the end, it could be something with higher upstream at the nerve level where you're having what's called CNS fatigue, or your nervous system is just overwhelmed and it can't keep sending the signal to release the ATP. So that's the main thing I just wanted to touch on with this one. So the muscle fibers we talked about last week as well. I think this is the last one we went through last week. This is just kind of show, based on the muscle fiber and how you train determines the type of performance you're going to be, one, focusing on, and two, getting in return. Main thing I want to remind us of is like our type 1s are low force, high fatigue. So meaning like they're very hard to fatigue. And part of that is because, and that's why they're more red, they have a lot more mitochondria or mitochondrial density. So that means they can do more aerobic metabolism. So that's part of the reason why they have great endurance, but they can't create a lot of force. So that's why somebody who's like got a lot of endurance, they're not the strongest person. They might have a harder time with heavier weights, at least early on, until they're hit that like 8-week mark, 12-week mark. They start putting on some muscle and they start developing more of these fast twitch. So like with a lot of my athletes, especially with the sports I work with, this is kind of what we're focusing on. Like we'll just touch this up in like in the off season stages, just to kind of build that. We talked about it last time, the aerobic base. That's to kind of build this. So we'll do some like, intervals or some circuit style stuff to help build this foundation, the oxidative metabolism. But then this is primarily what we're trying to train, these muscles, because we want them to be fast, explosive, and strong. So most athletes are going to be here. I'd say the average person is going to be somewhere in between, where they want a little bit of both. And then obviously you have like your triathletes, endurance athletes, stuff like that. They're going to be more training that way. So that's kind of the difference between training and muscle fibers. So this is the actual hypertrophy process. So like I was saying, this is the muscle fiber, and these are those like myosin and actin. So in there is like those little cross bridge cycles, right? So it's like a 3-step process. Basically, the first thing that happens after, and this is what this is showing, is basically you have the myotuber. That's what these little things are. And then you exercise, it causes damage to them, those micro tears. That's part of the soreness you're feeling, that you literally cause tears to your muscle. But then those tears cause an inflammatory response. So this is why inflammation in a training sense, acute inflammation is good, chronic inflammation is bad. So a couple quick little like applications to this. This is where, for example, like the conversation around ice baths are important, depending on your goals. So ice baths blunt this response. So by blunting this response, you're in essence shortening the muscle hypertrophy response. So basically the recommendation right now is ice baths are good, but you want to time them appropriately. 3 hours. Yeah, so it's generally you want to wait about 3 to 4 hours after your workout if you want to maximize the benefits of the workout before you do that, so you can get this inflammatory response, because that's necessary for everything that's going to follow. The other approach, and this might be more in an athletic setting, or maybe somebody just got a very busy, arduous schedule, is if you have something to do within those 3 to 4 hours though, and you're like, I don't want to be sore, I want to feel good, that's where you can, or it's like an athlete, they got a game later that day or a game the next day. You want to get the overall recovery process going. So that's where it probably doesn't matter if you blunt this response sparingly. So in general, you want to, and that's another one for athletes too, is like a lot will take ibuprofen and stuff like that for pain. Ibuprofen blunts this inflammatory response too. So that's where, for a lot of people, like avoiding ice baths and NSAIDs, especially if their goal is to maximize muscle, is where you want to avoid this. And instead, that's where your calories and your protein intake come into play. That will kickstart and help accelerate this process. So then basically what that inflammatory response does is your body detects those inflammatory markers, and then it activates satellite cells, which are basically muscle-specific stem cells. And then that is what tells your body to start growing more of those myosin, more of those actin. But in order to grow it, that's where protein comes in. So that's where, like, if people are training really hard, but their calories aren't there and their protein's not there, their bodies, even if they're doing everything right around the ice baths and everything else, they're never going to get there, because this creates the stress to grow. This is the stimulus to grow, but you actually need the building blocks, and that's your protein. So that's where the protein comes into play, is you need that to actually grow the muscle. So once that response happened, the first stage, and this is like early on, is you're going to get what's called sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. So you actually haven't grown any new muscle or myofibrils yet, just the area inside's gotten bigger. So this is like where you could think of it as like the pump. People start to notice like a little bit more swelling in their muscles. Their muscles haven't actually gotten bigger yet in the sense of more myofibrils or cross bridges. They've just created more space, and this space is what allows it to grow. So this is another area where creatine supplementation can come into play. Creatine supplementation helps draw water into muscle. This is the muscle cell. That's what sarcoplasm is. Like, if you remember the word cytoplasm. Sarcoplasm is just the muscle version of cytoplasm. So this is a muscle cell, and this is the fluid inside. So creatine helps pull water into this. And your muscle, one of the other things outside of force or tension is the word, stretch is another thing to induce your muscle to grow. So by having more water in here, it pushes this muscle cell outward and creates a pressure that helps accelerate this whole process. So that's where creatine can help your muscles grow on top of the energy benefits that help you recover faster. Both together is what leads you to feel stronger. Then after that, and now you have the space, and that whole process is done right, and you have the building blocks, you have your protein and your calories, then you start growing more cross bridges. And now you can see more cross bridges, and then that's that like 8 to 12 week mark beyond. Now this process is really going. Okay, does that all make sense? Okay, perfect. What did I just do? Okay. So now we're going into like kind of the application. So one principle that was taught to me in school, and it's just a phrase called the SAID principle. It's an acronym for specific adaptations to impose demands, which basically just means your body adapts to what you do most frequently. So whatever you do, your body's going to evolve and adapt to that. So if it's sitting on the couch all day, your body's going to get good at that. If it's strength training, your body's going to get good at that. And it's going to be, at least early on, mostly through the motor units, the synchronization, the firing rate, and then later on, the muscle hypertrophy we just talked about. Endurance training, it's a little bit different because your muscles aren't necessarily getting like super big. That's kind of what this picture here is portraying, is like this is like your triathlete, super long endurance runner compared to your sprinter. You're just going to get more efficiency. So your nerves are going to communicate better, so you can coordinate your legs in running patterns. Your movement's going to get more efficient. So the fiber type transition. So you're going to favor more type 1s over type 2s, and then the mitochondrial density, like I said. So you're going to grow more mitochondria, more aerobic metabolism. And with that, strength needs heavier loads. So you need to lift heavy if you want this. And then endurance just needs more volume and duration. You just need to do more stuff and stuff for longer. Then there's one other main principle, and this is where we're going to get into like the specific numbers. So the other principle is called FIT VP. So basically stands for frequency, intensity or load, time or duration of exercise, so like how long you're working out for. That could be in one given session, because frequency talks about more about how many sessions a week. Then you have type, or that's like exercise selection. You're doing more strength or endurance. And then volume, which is just the overall amount you're doing, sets, reps. And then the last one's progression. And that's an important one, is after time, your body adapts to what you do. So you need to change stuff up every now and again. So that goes back to like when we were talking about it in one of our other meetings, like phasing your training into like, I have like an endurance or hypertrophy block, and then I go into more strength stuff and then power stuff. And you kind of rotate the exercises, or progression doesn't even need to be the exercises. It could be the frequency, it could be the load, it could be the volume. You just need to manipulate these variables. I'd say for most people, 4 to 8 weeks. Like you could think beginners, they're going to need more frequent variations, 4 weeks or so. And then the advanced people are going to need less frequent variations, other way around. The beginners are going to be able to do the same thing for longer and still get benefits. You can kind of keep the program the same. So that's what I was saying with my youth athletes, like who are just starting training, like we'll do a strength block, same exercise, they'll progress through it. And then when we hit our final rep for that day, then we'll just do the same thing and we'll just add 5 to 10 pounds. So we'll just do it with more weight, or we'll add 2 reps to each exercise. But then when you get more advanced, that's going to need more frequent and specific manipulations. So that's where somebody might need like 2 to 3 weeks of this, 2 to 3 weeks of that, 2 to 3 weeks of that. So in terms of load, so we load, heavy loads greater than like 85% your 1RM. That's the range you want to be if your goal is to be strength. like type 2s. You want to be 85% above. While moderate load, 70, 85 are better for hypertrophy, and then for anything below that, like 68, 70% is going to be more like endurance. So like there's different ways of quantifying that and describing it to your clients. Like you could talk about it as a percentage 1RM. Another way is RPE. So that's where you like ask me on a scale of 1 to 10, how hard was that? And I was a 5 out of 10. Okay, you're not, that correlates with like 50%. So you can think 7 out of 10 is 70%, 9 out of 10 is 80%. So if you're trying to help them with strength and they're saying this is about a 7 out of 10, they could go heavier as long as the form's there, the technique's there. A better way, at least I find, because as well with RPE, that's perceived exertion, which is subjective. So if somebody's never really felt a 10 out of 10, they're not going to have a good sense of what 9, 8, 7, 6 are. And I've noticed that with a lot of my youth athletes. They're like, oh, that was like a 6 or a 7. Or they'll overestimate how hard it was because they don't have a sense of 10. So instead, I like to use RIR, reps in reserve. So I'd be like, I want you to, at this weight, I want you to feel by the end of it, you could do maybe 2 or 3 more reps. And then that's how you can kind of correlate the percentage week by week, is you can have like a lighter week to teach the movement. Say at the end, I want you to feel like you can do 4 reps at the end. Then the next week, 3. And then the next week, 2. And then if it's a testing week, you can go down to 1 or 0. If it's a non-testing week, you can deload the whole thing and then do that process over again. And then that way they're like, okay, I feel like I could do 3, and the next week try to add 5 pounds. And if they still feel like a 3, they're stronger. So volume, that depends on the load you're using. Volume and load are inversely related. So basically the heavier things get, the lower reps have to be. So basically for power, what you're thinking of is like 1 to 5 reps, because power is mostly nervous system. So if you're doing things more than 5 reps, you're not doing the level of volume necessary to prioritize those muscles. Because like we said, power is more type 2 stuff. So if you go beyond 5 reps, you fatigue the muscle enough to where you're not targeting that specific muscle, and therefore you're not making the most of your power exercise. And then like we talked about with the energy system, this is where you need full rest if your goal's power. So like your Olympic lifts, if you're trying to maximize your Olympic lift, do a set of it. Unless you're working on power endurance, then you're going to take anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes of rest before you do another round. Strength just goes up 1 more little rep, but it's about the same, and it's longer rest, just like power. It's about 1 to 6 reps. And then hypertrophy, that's like your 6 to 12 rep scheme. Moderate rest, like for that, you want to be around, like, I'd say no more than 3 minutes. 90 seconds to 2 minutes is like the happy spot, because part of the hypertrophy response, in addition to the muscle damage, is what's called metabolic stress. So as your body breaks down energy, it releases little metabolites. One we talked about was lactate. You want to accumulate that, because then that helps activate that inflammatory response. So that inflammatory response helps your muscle to grow. So that's metabolic stress. And like last one's endurance, 12 to 15 plus short rest. So that's where, like for endurance training, you could keep reps the same and just shorten rest every week. And you're like, okay, we're going to start at a minute, and then you're going to get 45 seconds, and then you're going to get 30 seconds. And they don't need to change reps. They don't need to change weight. You're benefiting their endurance. Frequency-wise, for most people, 3 to 4 days a week is ideal. And then once they get to that advanced category, and by advanced, I mean they've been training consistently for like 4 or 5 plus years. That's where they can go like 4 to 6, or they might need 4 to 6. But for most people, from 1 to 4 or 5 years, 3 to 4 days a week is going to be ideal for them. And kind of what I tell my clients is like 2 days to maintain, 3 days to see progress, 4 days to maximize your training. That's kind of how I communicate it. Exercise selection. This one, I mean, you guys probably know this, is, based on what exercise you use, that's going to target a certain muscle. So if you want to grow a certain muscle, improve a certain movement, you got to target different muscles. Main one, though, is just variation. So that goes back to where, you keep the movement more or less the same, but you want to vary it every 4 to 8 weeks, depending on their experience level. So you can go from just like a normal split squat to a front foot elevated split squat to a rear foot elevated split squat. And then that's going to slightly alter the muscle it's prioritizing while still being the same movement to keep it somewhat consistent for them. So it's not like every 4 weeks you're having to teach a whole new program. It's just like, okay, now we're going to put our front foot up. Now we're going to put our back foot up. Or we're going to go from dumbbell here to barbell here. So those are the manipulations I would make within like a 12-week cycle. So the movement stays consistent enough to keep proficiency in the lift and to minimize like coaching cues. And then after 12 weeks, That's now you can be like, okay, instead of split squats, we're going to go to lunges. And then just do the same thing and go, okay, we're going to go from dumbbell to front foot elevated reverse lunge to barbell. And then that kind of simplifies your programming a little bit. And you go from basically like most stable possible, least complex, to more instability and more complexity as they go. So that's kind of the programming around exercise selection. And then one more time, beginners, they're going to see rapid adaptations early on. Advanced are just going to be more specific and advanced periodizing types, and we have a week on that later. That was one I already have put together. So we'll cover exactly what I mean by like advanced periodizing and all of that. And then this is now going to come back to like recovery. So it's neuromuscular fatigue. So you can have fatigue at either spot,
I like
at the
that.
nerve or the muscle.
I like the cute diagram.
Yeah, I found that one. I was like, oh, it'll get a good laugh, maybe. So basically, neuromuscular fatigue in general is just exercise-induced decline in the ability of a muscle or group of muscles to produce force. And it's a process that basically involves two separate things. There's central fatigue and peripheral fatigue. Central you can think is the nervous system. Peripheral you can think is the muscle. Okay? Central fatigue is just when this guy or your brain is just those nerves, that signal is having a harder time sending that signal. It's slowing down. And that's usually found with like longer duration exercise. You've just been going for so long, your body, you're just like, I can't really move the same way. Or, and this is probably where in the beginning, and this is where I would say it's more often and why sleep, calories, recovery, all of that are important, is if you're training hard and all the time, but you're not sleeping well, you're drinking alcohol all the time, you're not eating well, you're not getting the recovery. So eventually you're going to get here no matter what. It doesn't even matter necessarily what training you're going to do. And then that's, you're going to notice like, I'm just more tired all the time. They're fatiguing faster on their exercises. They have a harder time concentrating. They're having a harder time sleeping. All that's like central nervous system fatigue. So that one's largely due to everything they do outside of the gym. Then peripheral fatigue, this is the one that occurs like at the muscle or nerve junction level. And this is just where you've ran out of energy. Your glycogen's been depleted. Your body can't make more ATP. Or it's maybe you just accumulated so much lactate and all the associated ions and metabolites that are associated with the breakdown of energy. Your body is too much fatigue to keep performing. So that's where like rest intervals, days in between training and stuff like that are important, or just varying the muscle you're working on throughout the week is important to help prevent that. So those are the two main types of fatigue. You can think, like I said, more out of the gym stuff, more in the gym stuff. So if you're noticing they're fatiguing very quickly, that's you can just rotate the exercises a little bit or implement a little bit more rest, change the load scheme, the rep scheme. And then I think the last one is just a little summary slide. And if there's any questions on it. So I guess just like key takeaways. So motor units, those like the building blocks of force. So because that's what tells your muscles to contract and move. So without that, you're not going to have force. Then fiber types, easiest way to think about it is like that's kind of what dictates how you perform. Those are performance differences. So you got type 2 fast explosive people, type 1 long endurance people. Training, it's both neural and muscle like we talked about. Nerve early, muscle later. Get them to that 8-week mark, push them through 12, and then from there they should be good. Or neural drive, all the nerve stuff's early, like we said, muscle later. And then last one, recovery, that's essential. So you need to get your sleep. You can use those ice baths. You can do sauna, all of that stuff. Protein and calories are going to be your biggest ones. Biggest bang for your buck, protein and calories. And then the other stuff's just kind of based on your routine, your schedule, and availability to all those modalities. Like if people don't like ice baths, I've seen, and it's a popular one I think I've seen, it's like a trend on Instagram now too, is where you just like do a face plunge. That one has similar benefits. And a guy's actually really good on this, if you don't follow him or know him, is Andrew Huberman. So he's a professor out of Stanford, and a lot of his research is around the nervous system and how to optimize its performance in recovery. So he actually has, like on his website, there's a whole 1 week, like what is the best way to work out? What are all the things you need to do in a week to maximize everything? And he has it all written out on a template. So he does a lot of research on that, on recovery methods. I think he's got stuff on the peptides now too. And he's got a cool little podcast. It's a little bit more in depth. Another guy, this one would be very high level, but he's a very cool, the way he does his practice, he's a medical doctor, Peter Attia. He basically is trying to start his own medical system because he's recognizing that like just going and looking at these little markers is enough. And he does a lot of stuff with women. He's like, I want to look at your hormones and measure your hormones throughout the month. And part of his screening process is he wants to see your grip strength. He does a deadlift, and if you can't deadlift, he does a leg press. So he also integrates like strength metrics within his metabolic profile when he takes your blood. So that's another cool guy. But his podcast, The Drive, is very, very in depth, very in depth. So that's where like I did the gist. He would go all the way down to the exact gene that's causing things to happen. So those are like two podcasts, two guys that are very good on these types of stuff at a high level that I like to follow and watch. But yeah. Any questions on all that? No? Okay. So yeah, so that's like the neuromuscular stuff. That's just kind of how your body grows, gets stronger. And we'll go into the following weeks. Now that this is, like I said, like the last couple weeks were set the foundation, and going forward, it's going to be more of like now applying all this information and how it's actually done from a programming perspective, coaching perspective, all of that.
Love it. Thank you, Alec.
Yep. And I think the final week we'll go into recovery. And then I talked with Zach, and he was asking what week would work best. He's going to do like a bonus week 9, which is going to be like on corrective exercise, PT-based stuff, injury, pain, performance, all of that. So Zach will do that too.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yay. Thanks,
Yeah.
Alec.
Of course.
Amazing. Thank you for making it today.
No problem. I put my key in a high place this time.